here with Andrew Kenneson. He is the winner of the CSPI Essay Contest, Policy Reform for Progress. His essay is called Gathering Steam, Unlocking Geothermal Potential in the United States, and he's here to talk about it today. Andrew, how are you doing?
Good. Good to be here.
Glad to have you. So, tell us just a little bit about your background. Where do you come from? What do you do? How did you get interested in energy policy? Just the basics.
Yeah, sure. I grew up in Tennessee. I went to a small school in North Carolina. I started working in local journalism. After that, worked for about 2 years at a newspaper in Georgia. Then I moved to Kodiak, Alaska, where I live now. Worked in the newspaper here for a little bit, and then now I work at the local housing authority on some federal rental assistance programs. Got interested in energy policy just because climate change is like a huge deal in the world, especially for people like me. We're young and plan on living for a little bit, and so I've always been kind of interested in that kind of thing. Um, and energy policy is a huge part of that. And I think geothermal is maybe an underrated component of that mix, and so that was kind of started my interest in that direction.
Yeah, you're a former journalist, right? Where did
Correct.
what did
Yes.
you write about?
Say again.
What did you write about?
I worked in a small newspaper, so I was kind of just writing about whatever was relevant to my coverage area. So at one point, that was a county in sort of outside Atlanta, Georgia. So it could have been anything from city council meetings to, you know, profiles of local people, crime, courts, economic development, did some sports, did all kinds of stuff. And it's kind of the same thing here, just sort of anything that was relevant to Kodiak, where I live now.
Yeah, what brought you out to Alaska? That's a pretty far. That's far away to go.
That's a good question. Um, my girlfriend just kind of always thought of we have like the outdoors and always kind of thought about moving out here. And I was trolling the job boards at one point and saw the job at the newspaper here and just sort of went for it, convinced them to hire me, and we've been here about 2 years.
So you started out as a reporter in Alaska, and then you found the job with the Public Housing Authority.
Correct. Yeah, that's right.
How did you make that transition to from reporter to Public Housing
Um,
Authority government employee?
I knew the director of the housing authority here, just because I'd read about housing here, and she's someone really knowledgeable about that in the area, and they had an opening because they got some money for federal rental assistance that came out of the COVID relief bills that passed Congress, and it's a small community. I mean, we're on an island, and so you kind of have to recruit people who are already here, and so she thought I'd be a good fit for that because I'm pretty interested in housing and stuff.
What's the island called?
Kodiak. So it's like an island off like the south, sort of like in the Gulf of Alaska. So I mean, picture Alaska. It's like in the southern kind of southwest ish area. Just this
I'm
like
pulling it. Oh wow, you are out there.
it's out there. We're off the road. We're off the road system. You can only get here by plane or ferry. Um, Population about 13,000 in this town and then surrounding areas. Yeah. Um, Yeah. So it's interesting. It's like I think it's actually an interesting case, like kind of interesting. Like I don't think I would have gotten a job with this kind of responsibility with like my lack of experience doing anything related to housing somewhere else. But here, if you can just get someone who is smart and will try hard at something, you can get a lot of jobs here.
How many people live on Kodiak Island?
13,000 ish, kind of give or take. It kind of goes up in the summertime because fishing's big here, and so some people come in to fish and stuff. But right around somewhere
You guys
13,000.
really sought out the remote location. You guys have
It
kids?
is. We do not have kids.
That might be a sounds like a great place to raise kids.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's. I
First
mean,
of all,
parents I know
you
here
don't
are
have
pretty
to answer
happy
that.
with it. I mean, the schools are better than you would think they would be for already right. They're pretty well run, and
I would suspect I would suspect they're fine. I think it's like quite a selected bunch that goes up
yeah,
there. So
my kids can kind of just run
okay.
around here. You just gotta kind of watch out for the bears.
Yeah. That is cool. Oh, okay, well, that's sort of a cool background. Geothermal energy. I mean, assume I knew pretty much nothing about it before reading your essay. I still know pretty much nothing about it except for what I read in your essay. So, just describe sort of what the geothermal energy is and just how it works.
Yeah, I mean, it's not super complicated. I mean, basically, the inside of the Earth is really hot, right? I mean, the very, very core of the Earth is 6,000 degrees, which is the temperature of the surface of the sun. So there's lots of heat inside the Earth, and at various points, that heat can leak out towards the surface. And so, for many years, you know, in certain places, there's heat that just kind of comes out of the surface of the Earth, and um, places that are near those areas are able to capture some of that heat, that steam, to drive turbines to create power or capture that and heat buildings. So what's interesting about geothermal right now is for a long time there was sort of only one way to kind of do it, which was you had to be in a certain location near a fault line or a volcano or like lava would kind of creep towards the surface of the earth and create that heat at shallow enough depths that you could access it. Okay, so a place like Iceland is the classic example on a fault line. Lots of hot springs, lots of volcanoes. They run most of their energy on geothermal energy. What's interesting now is that there's new technologies kind of available that allow companies to drill deeper and access that heat in areas that are not quite so close to the surface. And so uh, theoretically, if you could access geothermal energy anywhere on Earth if you drill deep enough. The interesting thing that's happening right now is companies are figuring out ways to drill deeper and create geothermal energy in places that you couldn't do it 20, 30 years ago. So it's kind of an interesting spot. Right? It's kind of an interesting spot right now.
So what determines how close you are to some kind of fault line? What else? I mean, uh is it like you're below sea level more, you're closer to the earth, or at that level it doesn't matter that much?
I'm
Is
not
it
sure it matters that much. I think it's more important that you're near a fault line where there's magma creeping up through this kind of through the crust. That's the crucial thing. So, I mean, actually, here in Alaska, there are outside Fairbanks. There's which is in the town in the interior. There's a little town that runs almost all on geothermal energy, um, and there's lots of volcanoes here, so there's lots of potential for the more traditional with the what I call it traditional geothermal in my essay, but what they actually would call it would be hydrothermal is probably the better term. And that's when the lava is already close to the surface, and its heat is actually heating water that's like trickled down there for some reason, and like that's pushing the steam up. And you put a plant on top of that, and that drives a turbine, which makes energy. Uh, so that's kind of the basics as far as I can know. I mean, I'm far from an expert, but I have done a fair amount of reading about this.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so you're saying it's becoming more feasible to use geothermal. So are there countries or regions that are capitalizing on this kind of energy?
Yes, I mean, like I said, Iceland is the classic example with hydrothermal energy. Kenya is another one that has really gotten on board with this, and they have a lot of energy coming from geothermal. But actually, the country with the most installed, I think, gigawatts of energy is the United States. So California and Nevada, in particular, have um, a number of geothermal plants, kind of based around fault lines there, and based around sort of more traditional geothermal hydrothermal energy. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely around. It's just like it can only be in a certain specific number of places right now.
Yeah, that's interesting. So what is this? So what's your policy idea to help make use of this technology?
Sure. Yeah. So like I said, there's lots of new technologies developing around geothermal that could put it in more places, which would be good for all kinds of reasons. Just more energy. And it's carbon free energy. Um, so so more geothermal. I think most people would agree would be a really good thing. Um, the policy I'm proposing is to exempt geothermal exploration from filing environmental assessments under the Natural Environmental Protection Act, called NEPA. So I guess I'll unpack that a little bit. So first of all, the first thing to know is that like a lot of geothermal places with geothermal potential are in the western part of the United States, where the federal government owns a lot of land. Okay, So a lot of places you'd want to look for geothermal energy would be in the West and on federal land. Right now, if you want to just go look, not necessarily build a big power plant, but just look, just like drill a hole in the ground and see, is there enough heat here to potentially sustain a power plant? Here, you have to file this very lengthy environmental assessment just to go explore on federal land. Okay, and so that is slowing down the
How far
development of
down do you
this.
need to go? How far do you need to go to have any idea whether it makes
That's a
sense?
good. I don't really know. It's a good question. It really varies on where it is, and I'm not super well versed in like the technical aspects of like you got to go this far down to like find this amount of heat because it kind of varies where it's at. But like you do need to do a fair amount of exploration to find something that's worth investing in. So uh, the thing I'm proposing is to basically exempt exploration from um, um, filing, geothermal exploration from filing these environmental assessments. So that way, it would free up the industry to do more prospecting, looking for places, do more experimentation, iterate, get better technologies without being slowed down so much by uh, by paperwork. Basically, one thing there was a study by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory that found that like you could if you do exempt this kind of exploration, which they would, you could reduce permitting time from 337 days to 88 days. So it's a lot faster. Um, and then, so I think it would allow more freedom to sort of explore geothermal resources and stuff. The kicker in all this, and what makes it really galling, is that the oil and gas industry already has this. So if you wanted to go drill for oil or gas anywhere on federal lands, you don't have to file an environmental assessment. You can just do it. And that's been the case since 2005. And so, really, what I would be calling for, and what others have called for, is just to put geothermal energy, which is carbon free and better for the future, on the same terms as oil and gas, which seems like it would be a no brainer, but it hasn't happened yet. So I don't know.
It seems like it would be a no-brainer. So is there, I mean, is there a justification that people give for first of all, for the NEPA doesn't even require you to do anything except have a report, right? It's not like it's not like a cost benefit thing. It's just like have a report. But well, is there any reason to treat like that's given even like an argument made for why oil and gas should be different from geothermal?
I don't, not that I know of. You're doing very similar things. Um, there's a small risk for geothermal it can cause tectonic shifting if you drill down deep enough. But I think when you're just exploring, I don't know this for sure. I don't think that's really a risk. So I think I really think it's um, just inertia. It's just always been this way. And I mean, the oil and gas lobby figured out a way to get it through in 2005, and I don't think the geothermal lobby, it doesn't exist, or it does. It's not as powerful. Does not have the influence to get that kind of reform, unfortunately.
Have there been any studies or any research done on potentially how much of a benefit this can be if you allowed, unlimited exploration of geothermal? What could potentially could it provide? A third of American energy, a tenth. Has anyone thought like in terms of what actual impact might be?
Yeah. Let me see. So, I mean, first of all, there's another analysis from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory that I cited in my essay that basically says that like doing this would increase the amount of discovered geothermal energy by 1 to 3% a year. So it's not like you wouldn't. It would. I mean that could be over the course of 10 years. I mean that could be a lot. Um, I think geothermal is kind of it's the renewable. I mean, when we think about renewable energy things. I think it's the one that has the highest variability, kind of, in like outcomes in the future. I think that makes sense. Like we're gonna build a lot of solar panels. We're gonna build a lot of wind turbines. We'll hopefully build a lot of nuclear plants. Geothermal could make kind of be what it is today, kind of bit part player, or it could be really big. I mean, like I said, you could theoretically do it anywhere, and it's doesn't have the intermittency problems that wind and solar do. With which that means the sun's not always shining, the wind's not always blowing, but the earth is always hot. Um, so I think if you can get some of these technologies to mature, I think it could be a really big part of the sort of renewable energy mix in the future, especially because it can act as sort of a backstop when like the wind's not blowing and the sun's not shining. So I don't know exactly. I mean, the NREL analysis suggests that you could. This is it would incrementally increase the amount of geothermal energy, which would be good. But hard to know exactly um, just by how much this could increase the amount of geothermal energy discovered and put to use.
So yeah, just looking up some data. So it's looks like the German geothermal energy right now they say is 0.4% of all American energy, but that varies a lot by state. So Nevada it's 9%, in California it's 5.8%, Oregon 2.2%, and then less in everywhere else. So yeah, that's interesting. How is it on cost once the startup once you build the plant? I mean, keeping it running and functioning, how does it compare to other forms of energy?
I think it's pretty comparable. I think and it really and like a lot of renewable energies, most of the how much it costs is going to depend on how much it costs to build, not so much how much it costs to maintain, right? So like a natural gas plant really is really dependent on like the cost of natural gas for how expensive the energy is. But geothermal, same with similar as like wind and solar, most of the costs are up front. So really, um, so if you could, so the more affordably you can build a plant, the less it'll cost in the long run, and there won't be a whole lot of other costs down the road. Um, I don't know off the top of my head how much it would cost to build a geothermal energy plant, but I've read that like once if you do it well, it is comparable to natural gas or something like that. So, but I'm not positive.
Yeah, sure. So it looks like Congress has. Can you talk a little bit about the congressional history? Because it seems like you're not the first person who ever thought this up. It seems like it's been an issue in Congress. What's you just give us a little bit of sort of the legislative history and the attempts here to try to move policy in this direction.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. This is absolutely not my idea. This is absolutely something that's been talked about. So as far as I could tell, 2011 was the first time this came up. Um, Two senators from one from Utah, one from Idaho, introduced something that would provide this exemption from NEPA for geothermal, but it died in committee and never made it. Where a lot of bills die, a lot of good ideas die there. Another interesting attempt is that in the end of 2020, Congress passed this big energy bill that did a lot of different things, but it was, as far as I could tell, it was in this was included in a more limited version. It was included in an earlier part of the bill, but then when it got wrapped into sort of like the year-end omnibus spending thing, it got cut out. And I would love to know why that happened. I could not figure out why that happened. Um, Fortunately, there is a new attempt to do this. Congressman Russ Fulcher and Mike Risch, who are both Idaho congressmen, have introduced a bill that would do it introduced it in September of last year that would do this, basically exempt geothermal energy, sort of like the exempts oil and gas from this NEPA requirements. But I've checked it a few times, and it doesn't seem like it's really gone anywhere. My hope would be that if something like Build Back Better or whatever it ends up being called gets passed, that gets pushed into it, because it would just make a whole lot of sense to if you're going to give out all this money to build renewable energy, to like make it a little bit more efficient to build renewable energy. But um, we'll see.
Yeah, yeah. So NEPA, I mean, everything has to do NEPA. So the wind, solar, I mean, basically basically any major infrastructure project that the government does, or it's not the government. NEPA is who? Wait, tell me exactly who has to fill out a NEPA. It's anyone who's doing anything
I mean,
large
it
scale
could be
construction.
government, it can be private. I mean, it's pretty far ranging. If you're going to do something on federal lands or could affect federal lands, you've got to fill out um, your NEPA stuff.
Okay.
So
So it's a federal it's
it's
a federal land. If I
it's
would just wanna buy if I just wanna build a house in the somewhere in non-federal, did is there a NEPA or is it about size
I
or what?
don't think so. I think it protects federal lands.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, the federal lands, by the way, is not it's not like small. Like people think federal lands, oh, there might be like a a little park or something. Look at a map sometime of federal lands out west, and it's like the entire state of Nevada, like the entire state of New Mexico, and a lot of California and Colorado and Wyoming. So
Yeah. Lots of
federal
Alaska
lands.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, the government just at some point just shut off the west side. Just decided that the west side of the western part of the country would not be developed to any great extent. I mean, it's an amazing actually, it's an amazing thing that this is sort of how it worked when the eastern half of the country just was allowed to develop sort of in private hands. It's a strange thing.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, no, I mean, you're right. There's I mean, you got there's national parks, which are the biggest things that people think of when they think of federal lands, Yellowstone or Yosemite. But there's also, there's so much more than that. There's national forests. There's all kinds of like 6 or 7 different sort of designations for like what you might call federal land.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Are they all like nature preserves? Are they all places where people can go hang out, or is it just some empty land sitting there doing
to some
nothing?
extent, yeah. I mean, they are. I mean, part of the purpose is conservation. And so, yeah. I mean, here in Alaska, for instance, like where I live in Kodiak, 2/3 of the island is a national wildlife refuge. Um, so there's lots of wildlife here, particularly Kodiak brown bears. And so it was created to protect that species, which is unique to here. There's giant bears that live here, and the salmon that feed them. And then there's certain rules first on like what you can do in a refuge. You can fish if you have a permit. You can hunt if you have a permit. But it's like some places like national parks, you can't do any of that stuff. And then like a national forest, like you can like run cattle, but you can't. I don't know. There's all kinds of very complicated designations for like what you can and can't do on federal lands, depending on what they are.
Yeah. So the I mean the policy. I mean the policy thing is interesting because you said what do you have you have any kind of gut feeling? Like it sounds like who would be against this? Maybe environmentalists, maybe oil companies. Can you tell anything by the partisan sort of composition of who's opposing it? Because that would
Yeah,
imply
that's
different.
that's a really good question. I think my gut feeling is, yeah, I don't know exactly. My gut feeling would be that like sort of old school environmentalists who sort of see environmentalism as like preservation, sort of like pre-climate change environmentalists who fought for the national park system and stuff like that, and fought for conservation, who see environmentalism as like protecting nature from industry. So I think that's probably the biggest thing. I think oil and gas might have some opposition to this, but probably less than you might expect because the skills are pretty transferable. I mean, the oil and gas companies, say what you will about them, they're really good at drilling holes in the ground, and to do geothermal, you drill holes in the ground. So I think that, I mean, a lot of oil and gas companies probably should be looking at shifting some personnel and resources to doing this kind of thing. They certainly have the money and the technology that could do this. I think some of them are, but I think probably the biggest, yeah, like I said, I think probably the biggest contingent would be, yeah, sort of old school environmentalists who don't want to see trucks and heavy industry on you know federal lands, I guess. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're very me, you probably, and people a lot of people listen to this I think are more like online people. So like, to us NEPA is sort of this, this just big wasteful thing that stops industry and progress. And then like, but I think I suspect that in like Congress and activist groups, they have a completely different outlook uh on these things. And it makes sense to why there would be uh resistance to this in Washington. Yeah, I'm not. I don't think I'm too surprised by that. There's no, of course, there's no. I assume there's no movement to revoke the oil and gas exception, is there?
no, no, and yeah, I mentioned it in the essay, but it's been really beneficial to them. And got Eli Dorado, who's been talking about all these things a lot, and kind of He inspired some of the things I was writing about. He wrote about how that 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 exemption helped them sort of develop a technology that created what we call the shale revolution, which was basically the ability for them to like drill into rock formations they didn't think they could, and withdraw a lot of natural gas and oil that thought was previously inaccessible. So there is kind of precedent for this kind of exemption causing technological development in a field. It was just oil and gas, but that was good for a lot of people. Definitely drove energy prices down.
Yeah. And is there anyone? I mean, anyone doing anything exciting internationally? I don't know if you saw what the Chinese are doing with some. They're building some absurdly high number of nuclear power plants apparently in the next decade or so. Is anyone doing any kind of crash program on geothermal or trying to advance geothermal in any meaningful way?
That's a good question. I mean, I mentioned Iceland and Kenya. Those are probably the two nations that as far as I can tell, that have the highest percentage of geothermal in their energy mix. Um, like places like Indonesia and the Philippines are looking into it too because they're also on fault lines that where you could get this stuff going. Japan has a geothermal program. I think Russia has some stuff going on. So like I mean, it's again like the technology isn't a new technology. It's just the fact that like now you could potentially develop it into be so that you know I don't Ohio could have geothermal energy one day in the future, which is nowhere near a fault line. That would be the exciting thing.
Okay, cool. So are you hoping, I mean, are you going to, do you plan on working in energy, advocating for this, or, doing anything to move the geothermal cause forward?
That's a good question. I've thought about it. I don't know. I'm a bit of a. We're moving in July, and I'm not really sure what I'm going to do next career wise. I'm really interested in housing and stuff, but potentially thinking about going to law school. But also, I don't know. Maybe I could work in policy for an energy company or something like that, or do communications something like that. I don't know. Yeah, I think it'd be cool to be kind of involved in um, stuff that's kind of on the cutting edge, pushing things forward. That'd be kind of fun.
Yeah, I think you'd be good at that. I mean, being interested enough to know as much as you do without having a direct sort of work interest in knowing this stuff. It's something rare. So I think that if you did go into policy or something like that, I think you'd have the inclination to do pretty well in it. So yeah, I hope you do that. Okay, cool. So is there anything you want to say, Andrew? Is there any people follow you on Twitter? Do you have a newsletter? Do you have a TV show? Anything you could
I,
mention before you
I'm
let you
I'm
go?
not. I mean, I'm online. I read a lot online. I'm not. I don't really participate much. I'm not really on Twitter or Facebook or really anything. I guess like a few things. I mean, I could shout out things that help me here. I mean, if you're interested more in geothermal energy, definitely check out Eli Dorado. He's been talking about this for a while. There's a company called or nonprofit just formed called Project Interspace, which they're trying to map out geothermal resources globally, then also fund early stage companies um, that would work in that space. So they're actually a nonprofit, but they're a cool group. And then if you just Google geothermal future, there's a cool website that kind of explains the basics probably better than I could with graphics and stuff to kind of explain how where we're at with geothermal energy and where it could go.
Okay, sounds good. All right. Well, thanks for being here, Andrew. It was great
Absolutely,
having you
yeah,
on.
absolutely. Thanks for having me.